Welcome to episode 13 of Paranormal Unwrapped with Krista Raisa and Jack Roth. Krista's a channel for the Orion Council, teacher, and creatress. Jack is an investigative journalist, author, and award-winning filmmaker. In this segment, we're discussing the divine feminine. What exactly is the divine feminine? Welcome to the broadcast, everyone. Nice to have you here. Brand new year. And it is Monday afternoon. How's it going?
They're going good. I know that we both have colds today, so it's it's just that time of year. So if we sound stuffy, sorry about that.
So sorry, guys. We'll just mute in between. I've got the heat cranked up, and it's just coming out. So
Yeah.
Who knows what's going on with us? It's funny we're both wearing black. I mean, you always wear black, but it had slipped my mind the topic because Jack and I will text each other before the broadcast, and I was so worried. I was like, wait, what was the topic again? And he had decided on this way back, and so I intuitively picked the color black to wear, and remembered that in Barbara Brennan's Hands of Light teachings, she explains the meanings of the different colors, and black supposedly represents the divine feminine, or the sort of infinite void. So it's quite a mystery. But Jack's going to tell you guys, while I blow my nose, he's going to tell you guys a lot about the history.
Yeah. Yes, the divine feminine. That's interesting. I didn't realize that. But a lot nowadays, we hear a lot about the divine feminine, and I think that started with when the Da Vinci Code, the book was written, and then the film came out, and then people, in that film, they talked a lot about the divine feminine, Leonardo da Vinci, and the whole idea of Mary Magdalene being representing the divine feminine. So, but it's really a fascinating thing, and something that there's a reason why people are feel connected to divine feminine energy, whether male or female. So what I did was, and this is, it goes back a long way. You had the Gnostics religion, the Gnostic Gospels, which was very early, when Jesus died, when he first was crucified. Within that 100-year period or so, a lot of the Gospels were written, and by particular people, certain people. We can never know really who wrote them. And then, a lot of the very early Christian sects, the Christian religions, were Gnostic in nature, Hermetic Gnostic, meaning that they were all about uniting the divine and feminine, the feminine and the masculine, in like this holy Gnostic matrimony. And they were basically, they were based on the recognition of the idea of the feminine principle and the divine. So the Catholic Church, when it started to gain power, was not about that at all. It was very patriarchal, right? And they decided which gospels to put in the Bible, and they made it a very male-dominated, male-centric thing. The whole idea of Jesus, God the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, Mary, the Virgin Mary, was very revered, yes, as the Virgin Mother. But Mary Magdalene was made out to be a prostitute, when a lot of people, in fact, believe that she was very important to Jesus's ministry. And she was the idea of this feminine. She basically represents. She was a role model for, I would say, wisdom, devotion, love, strength, and but it got lost in the Catholic Church. When they took power and they wanted to control people, they took that feminine energy out of the teachings, and and anyone who defied that, like the Cathars, which was an early Christian sect who believed very, very deeply in the feminine energy and the divine feminine, they were wiped out in the early Crusades. They were known as the Albigensian Crusades, way back in like 1200s. So, Krista, that's just a little bit of a background, but it shows you how there's this divine feminine energy, right? And it's there, and it's important, and there has to be a balance. But since the church kind of took the reins of any of the biblical narrative, we now have we've always had patriarchal societies, and hasn't really worked out very well, I would say.
I totally agree with you, and really on the same page with that. I want to add on to this because we could definitely talk about that for a while, and the different belief systems on the planet. I wanted to throw in Shaktism, because at first I thought that Shaktism was worship of divine feminine, but Shakti energy is actually the energy of nature. And when we talk about, the time, around the slightly before the Middle Ages, around the Crusades, you had the pagans and people who celebrated more of nature religion. So Shakti, nature energy, is neutral in nature. But when we talk about, typically in the West, we talk about divine feminine and divine masculine, we are talking about polarities and man and woman. So I have the tendency to go into a sort of biological sciencey perspective that, okay, women are XX chromosome and men have an XY chromosome, so that we're genetically different. But when you go into spiritual circles, people see this more as an energy, that we all are made of this energy. So there's this meditation on the yin yang symbol, and some people are kind of obsessed with the yin yang symbol, trying to figure it out. And of course, that's only one duality, the masculine feminine principle. But in my recent studies of the astral plane, I found from different teachers, from spirit communicators and shamans who exist in this dimension, is that first of all, there's a tendency for us to separate. In this dimension, we separate not only biologically, but in our consciousness, in our psychology, we separate these sort of higher concepts and into things like good and bad. So we just have a tendency to do that here. But then in this next dimension, because I was wondering about the gods and goddesses in the teachings of yoga, the spirit communicator, which I will talk about in my next spiritual teachers video coming up on the playlist shortly, is this guy in the afterlife said that he actually has seen the gods and goddesses on the astral plane. So a lot of the teachings talk about this as an archetype, and it seems really mystical and non-existent. But in teachings and theosophical teachings and spiritualist teachings, which is really based on the Vedic texts, which are thousands-year-old texts that come from India, more specifically, is they have legends like Mahabharata, Ramayana. These books talk about these ancient battles. And so with the sort of ET community, people are starting to hypothesize, like, what if this is real? What if this really happened? And I'm only talking about this because you're right, what Jack is saying, everyone, is that these stories have been removed. It's like women aren't just moms and prostitutes all day long. And these are the stories that are becoming these archetypal stories. So you wonder, okay, we finally have a Wonder Woman Marvel movie. We finally have the story of Black Widow coming out in the movies. And, unfortunately, this has been sort of the careers that women in the West had, like 1800s cowboy culture. You're kind of in the home or out in the saloon. But that's not the case. I believe there's tons of stories that have not been told. They're matriarchal societies, and right now in Finland, the Finnish parliament is run by millennial women under 35, which is absolutely mind-blowing. So
that's awesome, and they're ranked as one of the least corrupt countries in the world. So what's the correlation there? That woman. Yeah. There's a whole study done on it. Women are better leaders because women are more nurturing. They actually care about other human beings. And when you think about it, not that men don't, but women are more nurturing by nature, right? It's that feminine energy. And we all have both masculine and feminine energy within us. We should probably, mention that, obviously, dualism, the whole idea of that. But the idea that they're, think about it's almost been a patriarchal conspiracy since way back, since the men right, who ruled at the time, wanted to maintain power and control. So they minimized the role of women and the power of women, and they said they need to be. It's okay if you're the virgin mother, but you're going to be a mother. You're going to be a loving mother, but you can't be anything more than that, right? You can't hold power. In the Cathar society, men and women were equal in society, totally equal. And they talk about in the Gnostic Gospels and the Gnosticism, they talk about Sophia. Sophia is a main character in in Gnosticism, and she represents the female. She's like she represents the feminine aspect of God. So she was equal, and they said that what was the word? It's a syzygy. It's spelled Syzygy, and she was the syzygy. It's hard to say, but what that means is she was the female twin divine of Jesus. And many interpret that to mean actually the bride of Christ and Holy Spirit of the Trinity. So there was a great deal more importance put on the feminine in reality than what the church made it after that. But yeah, I mean, I'm so glad you mentioned that about Finland, because the same's true in Norway to a degree, where countries that are high on the index of being very democratic and having the lowest amount of corruption also happen to have more females in power. So what does that say? Look, I'm a male. Okay, so we're sitting here, and this is perfect conversation to have, Krista, right? Because you have the female energy, you have the male energy, and we might both be in touch with our opposite energies, which is important to be. But the fact of the matter is, I'll say vehemently right now that without female energy, without the divine feminine energy to balance the male energy, we're doomed. I mean, there's no spiritual growth whatsoever. And look at the track record when men are in power and hold positions of power: corruption, conspiracy, violence, war. Not that every woman in the world. I mean, there are women leaders who probably wouldn't be very good leaders, but for the most part, without that divine feminine energy to balance out the male energy, I think that throws everything out of balance from an energetic standpoint.
If we want to live on a planet and consume nature the way that we're doing, what energy is going to replenish this? And we were talking about fairies in the last episode, but and as sort of the spiritual counterpart of nature and animals, and when you have things like the volcano erupting in New Zealand, I mean, I know Earth goes through changes because the axis shifts. It's been shifting about 35 miles every year, and it just goes like this. That's how the axis of Earth spins. So it's not going to topple over onto itself. It's just shifting, and that means a change geologically. But in some teachings like Yogananda's work about worshiping the fairies, is, you know, why did we have icons and worship and statues? Because during the Roman period, a lot of the goddess statues at one point got destroyed. You know, just like you saw in Egypt when the noses were and the faces were destroyed. It was like that, and so I wonder. Is there some sort of value in honoring nature through things like art, through things like prayer and plays and poetry and music? Does honoring our environment, does the environment respond? A woman named Dora Van Helder, who I wrote about in my book Elementally Challenged, she explained that she's a clairvoyant in the early 1900s, and she would meditate on a rock, and she said when she sent a ton of love to this huge rock, she would actually see a spirit come out of the rock and greet her. And that has me thinking, all right, you know, if I start talking to trees and stuff, maybe there's actually a tree spirit that lives there. You know, what is that force that animates? And so Yogananda said that for example, the fairies started retreating into their realm because people stopped worshiping nature, people stopped honoring. So I wonder about these things and geological changes and how interconnected these are, and do our thoughts really create our reality? Where are we focused? So if anything, guys, my message for everyone is please freaking recycle. I go outside, my neighbors don't even care. I have all these recycling bins that says we recycle. They're not getting the message. I feel really strongly about that. So that's just where I'm coming from.
Well, it's all part of what we need to do, right? But like, it's funny because we've lost that connection with the environment, with Mother Earth, if you will. You go back again to pagan religions, which people were pagan for the most part before Christianity. There was Judaism, and then but pagan. You were pagan. You worship gods, right? Or several gods, but a lot of them were nature gods, and a lot of them were feminine gods. What people don't realize. Paganism has been given a bad name by who? By the church, right? Because it's like, oh, if you're in a field worshiping Earth, Mother Earth, and you're doing whatever you're doing, you're a witch. And they literally killed millions of people over the years because they were witches, or were females who voiced their opinion and said too much. How many women they killed who were free thinkers? And it's just ridiculous.
The books about this were banned books in the 60s. My professor from Isle of Wight in England, he said in the 60s, he's an English professor now, retiring soon. He would go to France to get these red books, which are because we had what's called censorship. So in the United States, people take for granted that you can just buy whatever book you want and get whatever information. There are places on this world that censor the internet. There are places here that censor certain authors. And we have this thing here called freedom of speech. There are countries on this planet where you get stoned talking like this. Or you wear a miniskirt.
Think about how women are treated in organized religions of today, those very patriarchal, that women in countries like even Saudi Arabia can be stoned to death for voicing an opinion, or for, a lot of things that you say, stoned to death. Think about how barbaric that is. But women have no power at all in the Muslim, Judaic, Christian Judaic, these religions that are so patriarchal in their nature and the way the hierarchy is, that there's no room for women. There's no room for divine feminine. And that's why people are like, wait a minute, and that's why people wonder a lot. They say, if Jesus, what would Jesus say? Right? You hear that a lot.
Follow the money trail.
Well,
follow the money trail.
Yeah, follow the money. Well, there's no question about it. All these.
Yeah, he was funded by Order of Magdalene. She, in Tom Kenyon's channeling, she went as a teenager. She supposedly her spirit came to Tom Kenyon, said that she went to this temple of Isis, and to learn all of these secrets. But to have a temple, you have to have money. To have a safe place for women to be, and a learning institution, there has to be some sort of gold or money involved in order to maintain knowledge, to maintain places like libraries, to have food, to provide warmth. So where did all that? He was traveling. Who paid for that? I don't think Joseph paid. I don't believe Jesus was a carpenter that they teach, and that people have this program, that you have to be poor and in poverty to be like Jesus. Jesus wasn't poor.
Right. They say it was a royal blood. Him and Mary Magdalene were both of royal blood. And then, look, that's another conversation. We get into the Priory of Sion. We can get into the Holy Grail. We can get into whether Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene and they had children. Sarah apparently was their child. I mean, there's a whole the bloodline thing. But honestly, when you think about it objectively, and you think about those times, I mean, why would Jesus being married to Mary Magdalene wouldn't have surprised me at all. So, but again, the church twisted everything to make it. They had to make Jesus divine, totally divine. They could not make him human at all. And if he was married to Mary Magdalene and they had kids, that made him more human. Plus, there was a bloodline, so they had to deal with the whole bloodline thing that they didn't want to deal with at all. So, it's so funny, Krista. We have these different topics, but it always comes down to the same thing. It's always about control, power, right? About how we're being suppressed in whether in our spiritual growth, you know, our human growth from the standpoint of being a human race and trying to evolve into what we're going to be, right? So there's always these roadblocks to that. And I feel like the suppression of information, like you say, right? If people are banning books, they're banning information. But it's all, but that's why people are, they're reaching out for, they're trying to find that one thing that connects them. And for a lot of people these days, it's the divine feminine, wouldn't you say?
Totally. I totally believe that is what's missing. You're absolutely right. Is when people are feeling emptiness in their life and boredom and confusion, and like go support your mom. Help your sister out. How are you? How are you receiving in the yin energy? Allow yourself. See if you can get inspired by a goddess. See how that changes your life. By empowering your own divine masculine through the giving and the doing.
That's right.
Yeah. And Earth is screaming right now. So that's the music, guys. It's been a wonderful chat. Did you have any other tips you wanted to add?
It's awesome. I mean, I just think, yeah, you don't have to, you're right. You don't have to be female to tap into the divine feminine. Divine feminine, what does it mean? Wisdom, devotion, strength, love, especially love and nurturing. Men need to tap into that as well in order to be better people. It's all about being a better person. So yeah, that's all I would say is that's you have to work at it and try to tap into that part of you.
Yeah. Well done. We'll see you guys in the next video. Comment below, click like if you felt this message today, and let us know where you honor your own divine feminine in your life.